If you watch this video until the end, you will be terrified. Hunters found a girl in the jungle who fell out of a plane and survived. However, she is not the only one. Today, you will learn about bizarre cases of people who managed to survive events that were practically impossible to escape. Are you curious to know what they are? So join us and let's go. Number 15. Children in the Amazon jungle. Imagine you are in the immense Amazon jungle, surrounded by unknown dangers, without food, water, or shelter. Now think about this terrifying situation experienced by 4 defenseless children. On May 1st, 2023, a plane crashed in the dense Colombian forest, leaving 4 siblings, 13-year-old Leslie, 9-year-old Soleini, 4-year-old Tien, and little Christine, just 11 months old, fend for themselves in a hostile and unforgiving environment. Desperation set in when, after 15 days of intense searches, rescue teams found only the wreckage of the aircraft and lifeless body. The children had disappeared without a trace. It was then that a Herculean operation was mounted to locate the little survivors. For 40 long and harrowing days, brothers fought bravely for survival in extreme conditions. Leslie, oldest, took on the role of leader and protector. Using ancestral knowledge passed down by her indigenous people, she guided her younger brothers through the dangers of the forest. For the first 4 days after the accident, the children remained close to the wreckage, waiting for help. Their mother, seriously injured, mustered the last of her strength to guide them before passing away. Heartbroken but determined, Leslie made a brave decision: go in search of help. With impressive skill and presence of mind for someone so young, Leslie improvised bandages using the plane's first aid kit, pecked her brother's feet. Carrying baby Christine in her arms, she led the journey through the dense and treacherous jungle. The young woman demonstrated wisdom beyond her years by collecting essential items from the wreckage before leaving. During their odyssey through the forest, the children survived by eating flour and bananas found along the way. When they ran out of drinking water, Leslie guided the brothers to a river, taking risks to keep them hydrated. Number 14. Yahya Abdi. Let's now learn about the surprising case of Yahya Abdi, 15-year-old teenager who lived for 8 years with a foster family in California. Consumed by the desire to reunite with his biological mother, Yahya made an extremely risky decision on April 20, 2014. Determined to reach Ethiopia, the young man managed to enter San Jose Airport without being noticed. In an act of courage, or madness, he sneaked onto the runway and hid in the landing gear compartment, plane about to take off. What followed was an ordeal that tested the limits of human endurance. For 5.5 hours, Yahya faced freezing temperatures and a lack of oxygen in the unpressurized compartment. As soon as the plane reached maximum altitude, the teenager lost consciousness. Miraculously, he survived the journey and woke up as the aircraft was preparing to land in Hawaii. Upon touching the ground, Yahya jumped out of the compartment and tried to escape, was soon captured. Doctors and police were shocked to discover the young man had survived in such extreme conditions. Yahya's determination to reunite with his mother seemed to have overcome all physical obstacles. Unfortunately, his dream did not completely come to fruition. Although he was unable to see his mother in person, Yahya was at least able to hear her voice on the phone. Before getting to know the next one on the list, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, you will receive content about the greatest curiosities in our world every day. So sign up right now. Now that you've done that, let's continue. Number 13. Bahia Bakari. Let's look at another impressive case. On June 30th, 2009, an Airbus 310-324 crashed into the Indian Ocean while approaching the Comoros Islands. There were 152 people on board, including crew and passengers. When rescuers arrived at the crash site, they expected to find only wreckage and bodies. To their amazement, they saw something unimaginable: a girl clinging tightly to a piece of the wreckage. Bahia Bakari, just 12 years old, was the only survivor of the fall. She reported that, moments before impact, the plane shook violently. How the girl managed to survive the fall is a mystery, but her quick reaction after the accident was crucial. Finding himself in the middle of the ocean, Bahia swam with all his strength towards the largest piece of the aircraft he saw. Despite her exhaustion, the girl managed to reach him and hold on tightly. Luckily, his ordeal didn't last long. A local fisherman had witnessed the plane crash and immediately called for rescue. When Bahia was found, she had multiple injuries, including severe burns. But most importantly, she was alive. Bahia herself admitted that despite the physical pain, the most devastating trauma was discovering that her mother, who was traveling on the same flight, had not survived. Number 12. Vesna Vulovic. The next case defies all odds and enters the book of records. Vesna Vulovic, a Yugoslav flight attendant, entered the Book of Records after surviving a free fall from more than 10 kilometers in height. The incident occurred on January 16, 1972, when a Yugoslav airline plane literally broke in half during flight. Of the 25 people on board, only Vesna managed to get out of this seemingly unsurvivable situation alive. After the aircraft disintegrated, Vesna plummeted more than 10,000 meters before landing in a forest in Czechoslovakia. The consequences were devastating. She suffered fractures to her skull, legs, ribs, and 3 vertebrae. It seemed impossible that anyone could survive such an impact, but fate had another stroke of luck in store for Vesna. Shortly after the fall, she was found by Bruno Honke, a park ranger who, coincidentally, was a former military doctor. Thanks to his knowledge, Bruno was able to provide vital first aid that kept Vesna alive until rescuers arrived. Vesna's recovery was long and arduous. She spent almost a year and a half hospitalized, struggling to recover from her serious injuries. Her willpower was impressive. 4.5 years after the accident, she managed to walk again, defying all medical expectations. Number 11. Survivor pilots. Now let's go back in time to discover another incredible story of survival, this time in the Pacific Ocean. On January 16, 1942, in the middle of World War II, 3 American soldiers faced an ordeal that would test their limits. Pilot Harold Dixon, radio operator Gene Aldrich, and bombardier Anthony Pastula took off from an aircraft carrier for a reconnaissance mission over the Pacific. What was supposed to be a routine mission turned into a nightmare when the plane got lost and ran out of fuel. Faced with the inevitable, Dixon made a forced landing in the water. In their rush to abandon the sinking aircraft, the 3 men managed to save only a small inflatable boat. Little did they know that this tiny boat would be their home for the next 34 days. For more than a month, the 3 soldiers drifted across the ocean, covering more than 1,500 kilometers. The fight for survival was constant. Several times they had to repel shark attacks with their bare hands, in a demonstration of courage and desperation. Their frustration reached its peak when they saw a plane in the sky, but were unable to signal for help. All emergency equipment had gone down with the plane, leaving them completely isolated and invisible to possible rescuers. When everything seemed lost, fate smiled on the 3 castaways. Their small boat was carried by the current to the island of Puka Puka. After 7 days on the island, they were finally rescued and able to return home. The heroism and resistance demonstrated by the 3 soldiers did not go unnoticed. Pilot Harold Dixon was awarded the Navy Cross, while the radio operator and navigator received commendations from the U.S. Air Force for their courage and resilience. This stunning story of survival against all odds inspired the film Against the Sun, released in 2014. Number 10. Mauro Prosperi. Mauro Prosperi, a 39-year-old Italian police officer and pentathlon athlete, faced an ordeal that few could endure. In 1994, Mauro joined 80 other athletes to take part in one of the most challenging marathons in the world, a race across the unforgiving Sahara Desert. The Italian led the race in the first 3 stages, demonstrating his excellent physical shape. However, during the 4th stage, fate decided to test its limits. A violent sandstorm hit the competitors. With visibility close to zero, Mauro tried to find shelter. At this crucial moment, he made a fatal mistake. He deviated from the planned route and became completely lost in the vast ocean of sand. When the storm finally passed, Mauro found himself alone in the middle of the hottest desert on the planet. His situation was desperate. He only had half a bottle of water and no idea where he was or where to go. For 2 long days, the athlete wandered the desert, hoping to meet other competitors or rescuers. But all I saw was sand and more sand. Fortune seemed to smile when he found an abandoned hermit's shelter. There, Mauro was able to temporarily protect himself from the scorching sun. Confused and desperate, the Italian even attempted suicide. Fortunately, his attempt failed, and he found the strength to continue. This critical moment, Mauro remembered advice given by a Tuareg. If lost in the desert, follow the clouds. With this guidance in mind, athlete resumed his journey. On the 8th day of his desert odyssey, when his hopes were almost exhausted, Mauro found an oasis. The sight of the water renewed his will to live. Near the oasis, a woman from a nearby settlement found him and quickly called the police. When Mauro finally regained consciousness safely, he discovered something shocking. During his pilgrimage, he had strayed more than 200 kilometers from the original race route. Number 9. Roy Sullivan. Now, get ready to discover a case that defies all odds. Imagine being struck by lightning. Now imagine this happening not once, but 7 times. This was the unbelievable fate of Roy Sullivan, an American park ranger who went down in history as the man who survived lightning the longest. Roy was working in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park when he had his first encounter with nature's fury in August 1942. While atop a fire lookout tower, lightning struck the structure. Startled, Roy ran downstairs, only to be hit in the leg again. Miraculously, he escaped with only a severe burn. The second incident occurred in July 1969. Roy was driving his truck during a thunderstorm when lightning struck him through the vehicle's open window. The impact was so strong that he lost consciousness. Upon waking up, Roy noticed that his eyebrows and eyelashes had been singed. Just a few months later, in 1970, Roy was struck a third time. This time, the lightning struck his shoulder while he was on his property. His fourth encounter with lightning occurred in 1972, when an electrical discharge hit his head, burning his hair. After this incident, Roy decided he would never leave a shelter during a storm again. But destiny had other plans. In August 1973, he left shortly after a storm had apparently passed. Minutes later, he was hit for the fifth time, again in the head. The sixth and seventh rays struck in 1976 and 1977, respectively. At this point, Roy was convinced he was cursed. The unbelievable story has made him a local and even international celebrity. Tragically, despite surviving 7 lightning strikes, Roy Sullivan ended up taking his own life in 1983, aged 71. The reasons behind his decision remain a mystery, especially considering his incredible ability to escape death so many times. Number 8. Ezequiel Cordova. In November 2012, a Salvadoran fisherman named Salvador Alvarengo embarked on a fishing trip in the Pacific Ocean with his partner, Ezequiel Cordova. What should have been a routine outing turned into an odyssey of epic proportions. 2 days after setting sail, a violent storm surprised them. The gigantic waves swept the small boat away from the shore, and the fishermen soon found themselves completely lost in the vast ocean. Salvador desperately tried to direct the vessel back to dry land, which he estimated was 50 miles away. Strong winds and relentless waves thwarted all their efforts. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. 2 men scanned the horizon for any sign of land. All they saw was the endless blue of the ocean. To make matters worse, the boat's engine broke down, leaving them at the mercy of ocean currents. After 2 agonizing months adrift, the tragedy intensified. Ezequiel, Salvador's partner, could not resist the extreme conditions and passed away, leaving Salvador alone to face the challenge of survival. During all this time, Salvador stayed alive by eating raw fish and drinking rainwater. His determination to survive was unwavering, even in the face of odds overwhelmingly stacked against him. Incredibly, 438 days after being swept into the ocean, Salvador finally saw land. He had arrived at Ebon Atoll in the Marshall Islands, thousands of miles from where his journey began. When he was found, Salvador was physically and mentally exhausted, but, miraculously, alive. Number 7. Ludger Sit Barris. On May 8, 1902, the Mont Pelée volcano erupted, devastating the city of Saint-Pierre and claiming the lives of 30,000 people. In the midst of this chaos, Ludger Sit Barris, known for his rebellious behavior, became the unlikely survivor of this tragedy. Ironically, it was his status as a prisoner that saved his life. Shortly before the eruption, Ludger had been arrested and placed in solitary confinement in an underground cell. When the volcano released a lethal cloud of hot gas and volcanic dust, sweeping the city with temperatures of up to 570 degrees Celsius, Ludger's location protected it from the worst. 4 days after the catastrophe, rescuers heard his screams and rescued him. Even though he was protected underground, Ludger suffered serious burns. After his recovery, he found an unusual way to cope with his experience. He worked in circuses, showing off his scars and sharing his incredible story of survival. Number 6. Masabumi Hosono. We now turn to a story that mixes tragedy and controversy. That of Masabumi Hosono, one of the survivors of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. While his survival initially labeled him lucky, he soon became a source of shame and ostracism in his native country, the Japan. On the fateful night, Masabumi managed to get a place on one of the last lifeboats. However, upon returning to Japan, he faced harsh criticism. Society accused him of cowardice, arguing that he should have accepted his fate like a true Japanese and given up his place to a woman or child. The reality was that Masabumi had boarded a boat that also carried other men, but but this did not prevent his reputation from being tarnished. He lost his job at the Ministry of Transport and became a social pariah. For years, Masabumi wrote memoirs, struggling to understand why he was treated so cruelly simply for surviving. Number 5. The man who survived 2 nuclear attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story takes us to one of the darkest periods in modern history. This Japanese engineer had the misfortune and unbelievable luck of surviving not 1, but 2 atomic bombs. In August 1945, Tsutomu was in Hiroshima on work when he witnessed the dropping of the first atomic bomb. Injured but alive, he returned to his hometown of Nagasaki, only to experience the second nuclear attack 3 days later. Miraculously, Tsutomu survived both events. Despite the traumatic experiences, Tsutomu lived a long and meaningful life. He became a staunch advocate against nuclear weapons, sharing his unique story in documentaries and memoirs. At age 93, he received recognition as an honorary hibakusha, a term used to describe survivors of the atomic bombs in Japan. Number 4. Anatoly Bugorsky. The case of Russian physicist Anatoly Bugorsky reminds us of the hidden dangers in cutting-edge scientific research. On July 13, 1978, Bugorsky suffered a bizarre accident at the Institute of High-Tech Physics near Moscow. While investigating a failure in a particle accelerator, Bugorsky inadvertently placed his head in the path of a powerful proton beam. The dose of radiation he received, between 200,000 and 300,000 Roentgens, should have been fatal. Surprisingly, Bugorsky survived. The consequences of the accident included hearing loss in the left ear and epileptic seizures. However, this did not stop him from continuing his scientific work. Number 3. Chris Gursky. While on vacation in Switzerland, Chris Gursky decided to try hang gliding for the first time. What was supposed to be an exhilarating experience almost ended in tragedy when the instructor forgot to fasten his seatbelt. For more than 2 terrifying minutes, Chris desperately clung to the paraglider's bar with just one hand, dangling more than 1,000 meters in the air. When they finally landed, Chris had suffered injuries to his wrist and biceps tendon. Surprisingly, this near-fatal experience didn't deter him. Chris expressed a desire to try again as soon as he recovered. Number 2. Beatrice Flamini. Beatrice Flamini became the first woman to spend 500 days in a cave willingly as part of a scientific experiment. An experienced climber, Beatrice accepted the challenge of living alone in a cave 70 meters deep. Initially, she took advantage of the calm and solitude, dedicating herself to painting, knitting, and reading. However, as time passed, the effects of isolation began to manifest themselves. After a month, Beatrice began to feel slightly afraid. 6 months later, she experienced auditory hallucinations. The experiment tested not only his physical endurance but also his mental health. When project organizers finally came down to pick her up after 500 days, Beatrice was shocked to realize how much time had passed. Number 1. Juliana Kupke. Let's look at the story of Juliana Kupke, a 17-year-old girl who fought against all odds to survive. On December 24, 1971, the plane in which Juliana was traveling with her mother crashed during a storm. Juliana was the only survivor among 92 passengers. Having grown up in the Amazon jungle, the daughter of zoologists, Juliana was better prepared than most to face the challenges that awaited her. Even with fractures, eye injuries, and head trauma, she decided to seek help on her own. For 11 days, Juliana navigated the dense rainforest, facing hunger, exhaustion, and the dangers of the jungle. Her unwavering determination led her to an abandoned pier, where she was found by local woodcutters. Do you see this video that is appearing on the screen? Click on it to check it out, as I separated it especially for you. Well, that's it, and until next time, curious.